Stars
Podcast. This is the
Let me talk to you. This is such good shit.
big show coming your way on the Friday podcast today. A very rainy Friday. It is really coming down hard out there right now. How's everyone doing? Thanks for tuning in to the Five Starr Wrestling Podcast. We are here each week, Monday and Friday, on YouTube and Rumble for wrestling recaps and reports. We talk AEW Dynamite, Rampage, NWA Power, weekend of pay-per-view events, retro content, whole gamut of good stuff. If you're checking out the show for the first time, make sure you subscribe, click the bell icon to stay posted of when our shows go up, like the show for me, and leave a comment to share your thoughts on the topics we discussed today. For the Friday show, we've got the continuation of our retro review series, in addition to the Dynamite Report. Real quick for this week, we're going to be subbing out our usual World Class Championship Wrestling recap for a WWF recap, because the last 2 weeks of World Class content is not currently uploaded on the Peacock library. Last week we subbed out the show for a recap of Super Brawl 6, and this week we are going to be subbing out for a WWF In Your House event. It was WWF In Your House 6, which took place on this day, February 18th, in 1996. And, of course, we will get to all the good content eventually, but first we must run down some not-so-good content. And speaking of such, perfect time to transition into Dynamite, the February 16th edition, for those of you keeping score at home. Courtney, get me my gun. You know, I even had high hopes for this one with the way the show started, but never underestimate AEW's ability to feed you some good material early on and end up flipping the show to turn out flatter than a plate full of piss by the end. I really should learn my lesson by now, but I think I'm still in the TNA mentality when it comes to watching this show, where I just keep lingering on to hope that things will someday get better when the reality is it probably won't. Started off good, at least. We had CM Punk in the ring, sitting in pretzel position, spitballing one of his very early career promos about being alcohol and drug-free, which meant that he was better than everyone. Says that Punk was an inspiration for a lot of young guys in the back, including MJF. And, well, as per last week's Stips, because Punk beat FTR in the tag match, he gets to pick the time, date, and stipulation for their match. And obviously we all knew the match was going to happen at Revolution. That wasn't all that shocking. The dog collar match was a pleasant surprise, though. Probably would have felt more special if they didn't already do that match with Cody and Brody Lee a little over a year ago. But he ends up calling out Max so he can deliver his final message to him. And he ended up revealing an old photo of little baby Maxwell Jacob Friedman meeting CM Punk for the first time at an event. Says, for MJF, it was the greatest day of his life. For Punk, it was just another Friday. That one probably stung like a motherfucker. And his final word to MJF is that come pay-per-view time, he is going to stain the ring with his blood. And I think by the time this is all said and done, it really just kind of hit me how meaningless AEW has already made gimmick matches in their company. A CM Punk MJF dog collar match should feel like a big deal. It should feel special. And given their history, given the blood feud, and given the amount of time these guys have been feuding, I mean, this is a circumstance where a bloodbath, anything goes, no holds barred stip match makes sense to do. All the while, like, don't get me wrong, I'm looking forward to the match and all, but I mean, goddamn it, son, I gotta call it like it is. Like, AEW has completely killed the intrigue of gimmick matches. They do them way too fucking often. None of them feel special anymore. I mean, Christ, the last match AEW held on Dynamite last week was a Texas Deathmatch main event where both guys bled like a faucet and did a bunch of car wreck hardcore shit for 20 plus minutes. I mean, not to mention, they just did a no DQ match on this very show. Yeah, granted, Punk and MJF are talented enough where I'm confident that I won't expect them to just do a standard blood and guts plunder match. I mean, those guys are way more professional than that. But it's the principle of the matter. If AEW only did gimmick matches when they actually mattered and when they were warranted and, didn't do them every fucking week for no reason, like, I'd be foaming at the mouth at the idea of seeing MJF and Punk in a dog collar match. It would feel really special and important if that were the case. Instead, it's just, okay, cool. Should be good. Now, can we lay off the fucking stip matches for the next 8 months so we can recuperate from seeing everybody bleed and pointlessly kill themselves in car wreck garbage matches for no reason? Like I said, good opener. And it was followed with a good match, but before I get to that, I did want to touch on this. I didn't write a whole lot down about the Jurassic Express promo, other than the fact that Jungle Boy apparently likes three-ways. But apparently next week they're doing 2 separate tag team battle royals to crown 2 number 1 contenders to face Jungle Boy and Luchasaurus at the Revolution pay-per-view for the tag belts. Seems overly convoluted and unnecessary, but sure, why not? At least if Red Dragon wins one of the battle royals, I can look forward to one of my 2 title dream matches coming into the fold. Yeah, probably means FTR will get punked out again, but I mean, is anyone giving their hopes up that FTR will ever matter in this company ever again? Following that, we got Bryan Danielson versus Lee Moriarty. I had no idea Lee was from Pittsburgh. And you're probably thinking to yourself, Moriarty's had like a dozen or so matches on AEW TV by now, right? Well, fine. Maybe if guys were consistently booked on the show and didn't only work matches every other 6 weeks, I could keep track of guys' hometowns and bios more often. Fuck me, right? This is a really good match, though. Certainly the best Lee Moriarty match I've ever seen on this program. Granted, it helps he was working with someone who actually knows what he's doing. But I really honed in on Lee's work in this match, and I liked a lot of what I saw from him. He was a little rough around the edges in some departments, but there's something there. He was serious. He had good facials. His basics are solid. His transitions were pretty smooth throughout. His pacing was good. I liked just about everything I saw from Lee in this match. I think if AEW was serious about pushing this guy into a more central mid-card role in the coming year, I wouldn't be opposed to it. Give him a shot and see how he does. Problem is, knowing AEW, we probably won't see Lee Moriarty work another match until spring of 2026. And I even like the post-match promo with Danielson and Moxley. Well, pump the brakes. I should say I liked it contextually. Mox's comments on being poor, young, and dumb like the young guys in the back, stupid. Like, especially when you factor in the fact that like 97% of AEW's roster consists of young, poor, and dumb guys. Just like, way to bury your roster, Mox. Splendid work. But I won't harp on that because the gist of the promo was Danielson wants to know if Moxley will team with him. Mox tells him that throughout his entire career, he's gotten multiple chances to wrestle Danielson, but he can never beat him. So now the $1 million question is circulating. Is Danielson only extending the offer to team with him because he's afraid of fighting him? Or is he really trying to cultivate some kind of mini dungeon training center for Mox and Danielson to recruit a bunch of young guys and teach them how to work? And he basically says he's not saying yes or no, but Mox makes it clear that he does not team with guys that he does not bleed with first. So, yeah, a rarity of a Jon Moxley segment in AEW that I actually somewhat enjoyed. Never said the guy couldn't cut a good promo. In fact, I think I'm on record saying it's probably the only thing I've ever really enjoyed about watching Mox on this show as an on-screen talent. His matches are another story, but I mean, I'm not totally tapping out on this story yet. It is possible it just ends up leading to a match with them at the pay-per-view and they team up and Mox ends up dragging down Danielson by association, just like he did with Punk last week, but I will reserve judgment until I see where it goes. And as kind of expected, the show pretty much fell off a cliff after Punk, MJF, and Danielson. We get the Wardlow Max Caster qualifying match for the Face of the Revolution ladder match. Whew. Not good. Especially whatever in the fuck that exchange was before the commercial break. That was a prime example of Caster and Wardlow being on two completely separate pages with what they wanted to do. Look, here's the thing with Wardlow. There's one thing he does that's over with the crowd. There's one thing that the people want to see in Wardlow matches. The powerbomb. Everything else he does is completely futile. I pretty much compare Wardlow's booking with how they should be ideally booking Jade Cargill if they had a clue. Quick, short squash matches, powerbomb symphony, 1, 2, 3, get in and get out. Anything that remotely involves Wardlow selling and or going long is just no. And like I know it only went like 5 minutes, but in my book that's probably about 4 minutes too long. The right guy won, but how they got there was not entirely effective. I will say this, though. It is an interesting scenario that they've, I wouldn't say inadvertently created with this ladder match now. Because they've got both Keith Lee and Wardlow booked for the pay-per-view. Story-wise, they've been pushing the story of Wardlow winning the match so that MJF has an easy pass at the TNT title. And that's probably the direction they end up going, and it would totally make sense. But again, I'm going to reiterate what I said following Keith Lee's debut match last week. AEW has really dropped the ball with a lot of these former NXT, WWE crossover talents, particularly the guys with a little bit of name power. And right now, the speculating rumors of AEW bringing in WWE guys so that they can outright bury them, while I don't think it's entirely true, it's also not a completely ludicrous argument when you actually analyze how most of the former NXT and WWE guys have been treated and used on this show. AEW needs a course correction, and they need to course correct sooner rather than later. Keith is a big motherfucker with name power, and he's incredibly hot with the crowd. And maybe they'd be too hesitant to want to get over another monster babyface right now when Wardlow seems to be the future investment, but goddamn, do they have the perfect opportunity to steamroll Keith Lee right to the TNT title. Like, if I'm booking that match at the pay-per-view, I'm having Keith Lee win. And I'm booking him in a title program with Sammy immediately. I'm having Keith go in there and win that belt in dominant fashion. 2 minutes or less. If AEW wants to put to bed the notion that they have a vetted interest in burying all the new arrivals, they can do that by pushing Keith Lee straight to a singles championship in the coming months. Because, I mean, what happens if Keith doesn't win the ladder match? Okay, well then what are you going to do with him? Have him stagnate on the show and feud with Matt Hardy's Job Squad? Who the fuck wants to see that? We had a hype segment for the women's match later in the show with Mercedes Martinez and Thunder Rosa. A segment that consisted of Britt Baker telling Martinez to get the job done and take out Rosa for good. And who should then walk into the frame but, as I wrote down, a random man. A man that we've never seen on the show. A man that was not recognized until later in the program when he was shown sitting at ringside. And for reasons that I still was not able to determine after the show was over, a man that had an interest in seeing Britt Baker's crew demolish Thunder Rosa. Why? I don't know, but I don't think anyone else knew, so you're not alone. The short answer is it's AEW, where nothing makes sense and no one knows what the fuck's going on half the time, including the people booking it. So then we got the promo segment with Hangman Page and Adam Cole. And yes, they are indeed still pushing this program like we did not just see Adam Cole job clean to the company mascot less than 3 weeks ago. And I'll be blunt, I don't think they could have picked a lamer and less interesting way to build a pay-per-view world title match if they tried. The segment was Adam Cole pretending to have respect for Adam Page, pretending to appreciate him for all the good he's done for AEW, and after Cole teased leaving, Page gets jumped by Red Dragon, soon to be followed by Cole. That was the segment. And yes, stupid babyface is falling for the easiest heel trick in the book. Adam Page, world champion, supposed top guy in the company, fell for it hook, line, and sinker. I should actually note, no, that was not the entirety of the segment, just that beatdown. It was made worse by the appearance of the goddamn job order running off the Undisputed Era. As if they needed any more of a reason to kill interest that I could possibly have for an Adam Page, Adam Cole title program. Sure, why not? Send out the masked indie goofballs to make the save. And what the fuck was with the pointless angle of 10 beating up all the security guys? Look, they just do that angle so they have a reason to book Adam Cole versus 10? Who the fuck cares? It's 10. No one gives a fuck about 10. Or anyone else in that faction for that matter. This faction sucks since it showed up 3 years ago, yet here we are in 2022 and they're still trying to force this group on TV like it's a thing that matters. Of course, I could say the exact same thing about the Best Friends, but how many times have I been over that? God, this was such a dud of a segment. And by the way, the Adam Cole has a dad bod sign didn't go unnoticed. Hey, at least I got to see Red Dragon. Glad to know that the only reason they signed Kyle O'Reilly was so that he could just do a bunch of mass beatdowns and, not actually wrestle. Up next was Chris Jericho and Jake Hager versus Santana and Ortiz. Speaking of things that no one could possibly care about at this point. The best thing about it was seeing Eddie Kingston make the big return here, but, even that ended up feeling like a sour note by the time the segment was over. There were "This is awesome" chants during the midway point of this match. It was not awesome. Sorry to take the piss out of the fun. I don't know. wasn't a bad match. It was there. I've kind of talked about the lack of intrigue I really have for an inner circle team split, much less seeing Santana and Ortiz branch out on their own as a team. I mean, good for Ortiz for taking initiative and trimming off some of the excess body fat, getting himself in relatively decent shape. Yeah, they both have seemed to have cooled on the cartoonish antics, and they're at least taking their shit seriously now, and that's good to see. But I'm just looking at through like the bigger picture here. It's like they've already got like 50 teams they're trying to fit on TV right now. Like, unless they're planning to put the belts back on those guys in the coming months, like, I really don't know what the whole end game is with any of this inner circle drama. Again, other than booking Eddie Kingston and Chris Jericho in a pay-per-view match, which I can't imagine is the thing people are dying to see. Yeah, I really didn't get a whole lot out of this segment. Then we got the Mercedes Martinez Thunder Rosa no DQ match. And unfortunately, the curse of bad AEW women's matches did not exclude this one. And I like Thunder Rosa. I've always been a relatively big fan of Mercedes Martinez. I'm just so sick of these fucking no DQ garbage matches, man. It's the same story every time in these matches. Hit each other with a shit ton of plunder for 10 minutes, pray to God no one dies, and forget everything that happened the minute it's over. I mean, the most notable spot of the whole thing was the ill-fated moment where they pull out a table from the outside, and of course they go to set it up and one of the legs broke on it. And, God, poor Rosa. I actually started laughing at this. I felt so bad for her. Like, she's clearly frustrated. She's going to look under the ring for another table. She can't find anything, so she's just like, fuck. And, of course, they planned a spot with a table in this match, so god damn it all, we're going to do a spot, broken table leg or not. And Mercedes ended up giving Rosa a fisherman buster off the apron onto the table. Keyword onto the table, not through the table. More so because it was leaning up against the ring apron. It was not set up properly. I could also chalk it up to another case where the table weighs more than the girls. So even in their concerted effort to break the table with a suplex, they still couldn't do it. But, yeah, the match sucked. And more than it probably should have given the experience of these two. The spot where Rosa hit the dropkick on Mercedes with the garbage can, and then Mercedes grabbed the ropes for the break, in a fucking no DQ anything goes match, that pissed me off. This was also where we got the revelation that the guy from the previous segment was John Kreese. Again, who the fuck? But, after Rosa hit Martinez with the Thunder Driver onto the chairs for the 3, that is when Britt's crew hit the ring for the Afterbirth beatdown, ended up laying out Mercedes with the pipe anyway. Another great instance of a stupid babyface coming into play. And, oh, great. After they just established Mercedes Martinez as the hitman for Britt Baker less than 2 weeks ago, they've already jobbed her out on TV, and she's already basically turned babyface thanks to Britt turning on her. Can these people do anything fucking right? I know the answer is no. I don't even know why I bother asking. It just, I don't know. It still angers me. I think they did a skit where the House of Black teased a third member. Right, because we haven't really established Brody King yet, so clearly we're ready for another member to get introduced. Makes perfect sense to me. Then we get the main event. Darby Allin and Sammy Guevara for the TNT title. And JR informed us in the early goings that AEW officials do not get enough credit for the great job they do. Right, Jim. Sure, we'll go with that word. Credit. And I will say this, up until the totally lame finish that killed the match entirely, I thoroughly enjoyed this match. I know I've seen Sammy versus Darby matches on AEW TV before, but this was the first one, I think, where it felt less of a PWG style match where it was just all moves based and spot focused. And the guys actually felt like they were going out of their way to put together a competently constructed pro wrestling match. They worked body parts, they sold well throughout the match. There was some nice technical mat work going on throughout the match from both guys. Believe it or not, one of my favorite spots of the entire match was the deal in the corner where Darby was working over Sammy's leg, and he had him tied upside down in the Tree of Woe, so he just started extending Sammy's right leg while the ref was counting him to break the illegal hold. Like, it was a total heel move, but, I mean, it looked fantastic and totally believable. The spot where Sammy gave Darby the cutter after trying to do the suicide dive to the outside, that looked cool. And like I said, everything was going along fine. Crowd is totally into the thing from start to finish, and God, did it hit a brick wall at the finish. First, a guy hit the ring, quickly to get cut off by Sting. Turns out the guy was Jose, Andrade's assistant, who I still cannot identify if you put him in a police lineup. He just looked like a fan hitting the ring is what it looked like. And that, of course, allowed for Andrade to come in from the other side and clock Darby with his iPad on the top rope so Sammy could hit the GTH and win. And, of course, AEW's grand official that apparently doesn't get enough credit for the incredible work he does was apparently too stupid to visibly look down the entryway to see Andrade standing there like a moron before Sammy set up Darby for the GTH. Like, what? Did Bryce think he was just out for like a smoke break or something? Fucking moron. So yeah, finish was lousy. And of course the heels hit the ring and beat up the baby faces to close out the show. Andrade held up the TNT titles, and I can only hope and pray to God that's not the direction they're going to go for the future title switch. No offense to Andrade, but we are long past the point of return for that guy. I'm over Andrade in AEW. He's been a complete waste of time, energy, and money, and I have zero intrigue in seeing him win that TNT championship at any point in the next millennia. So hopefully that's not where they're going. And I know I didn't cover this yet, but I am privy to the story, so I did want to touch on it for a minute. Yes, I know about the Cody Rhodes situation. And the fact that Cody was merely passingly mentioned on the show and nothing was ever brought up about the fact that he left the company, it was very strange. There's a lot I could say about it, but honestly, anything that I further inject into the story by now probably won't have already been covered by the experts or the media outlets in some manner, so I'll just say this. I wrote an entire article on the AEW EVPs, specifically on the Young Bucks, I think the topic was. And I remember talking in that article about the possibility of what would happen if those guys ended up leaving the company down the line and how I envisioned it would affect the overall direction of the company. And point blank, I pretty much said that I didn't think it would make that big of a difference in the grand scheme of things. And the truth is, I think the same can really be said about Cody. You know, AEW's got plenty of fresh talent they're trying to get over right now. And let's be honest, Cody really hasn't been an integral part of the program in a long time. And if he ended up in WWE making more money and getting a bigger push and focus than he's gotten in AEW in the last 2 or so years, good for him. He's a smart businessman. You know, Cody Rhodes has been a very interesting phenomena for me to analyze in the last couple years. I've written many articles on him, and I still stand by a lot of what I said in my article about his relationship with the fans and the whole weird reality that he thinks he lives in. like, Cody's distorted perception of his relevancy and talent it's truly remarkable. What he sees in himself as compared to how the mass public sees him, they're just about as polar opposite ends of the spectrum as you can get. Personally, I don't see much of that changing if he ended up returning to WWE. I don't see him receiving much of a different response than what he's received in the last year or so from the fans. I mean, granted, he might get that initial nostalgia pop if he shows back up, but God, keep in mind, too, it's WWE we're talking about, man. Like, if you have any confidence in WWE's ability to effectively market and book anyone in their company in 2022, regardless of who it is, you're kidding yourself. Do I think Cody will matter in a year or two if he ever returned to WWE? No. Do I think he'd end up being just another guy sooner rather than later? Yeah, of course. Like what has WWE done in recent memory to suggest otherwise? And don't even get me started on Brandy. Good Christ. Like, honestly, I don't even know why WWE would even be interested in offering her a contract at this point. Like, what are they gaining out of it, seriously? Like, she's a horrible wrestler. Her promos are turn the channel heat. Unless they make her a ring announcer again, what purpose would she even serve? You know, other than just being Cody's valet, which, I mean, okay. But, I mean, we all know Brandy by now. You know, see how long that lasts before she starts pitching a fit to creative that she deserves better. Yeah, this Cody thing is bizarre. Again, I'm not knocking the fucking guy. You know, if AEW ain't going to offer you more money and WWE's bending over backwards to pay you a six-figure income to come work a few top programs and matches a year, it ain't a bad deal. You know, especially if Cody's looking to eventually pursue more movie and acting roles in the future. I mean, he's got a foot in the door with WWE, that's for damn sure. I don't know how things turn out contractually with him doing his current programming on Turner Broadcasting, but for all we know, this is where Cody sees himself in the future. You know, if he can get away with making a shit ton more money on a lighter road schedule with guaranteed movie deals, it's right down Cody's wheelhouse. I mean, he hasn't bluntly put it, but I mean, based on the way he's conducted himself to the public in the last couple years, I mean, he's clearly checked out of wrestling altogether. I mean, I'm sure if you asked him, you know, just sat him down and said, what do you prefer, like acting or professional wrestling? He'd probably tell you acting at this point. So, I mean, wherever he ends up, wherever he turns out in the coming year, hopefully it works in his favor. Yeah, I think it's a big financial risk for him to be signing with WWE right now, especially in today's climate where, you know, it seems like people are getting cut left and right, but you know, it is also important to keep in mind that Cody's not a jag in WWE. So, even though I don't have any confidence in their ability to book him properly and not end up making him completely irrelevant in 6 months, I'm not going to completely dismiss the possibilities of what they could conceivably do with him either. Getting back to Dynamite real quick here, just to wrap everything up. The first half hour of the show was really good, up to the Bryan Danielson stuff. And the main event match was good until the crappy-ass finish. And everything in the middle was the usual that I come to expect out of Dynamite programming at this point. A lot of meaningless stuff going on with characters and talent that I've been given no reason to have a vague interest in. I have no investment in the world title program right now. The Jericho-Kingston feud is a no-go for me. The tag team stuff with the Bucks and Red Dragon will probably suck because the Bucks are involved with it. And the rest is the rest, as usual. If it's not a Punk, MJF, or Danielson segment, I take it with a grain of salt and just pray for the least amount of stupidity as possible. Most of the time I get the polar opposite and they just barrel through with the most amount of stupidity as possible. So I think we're ready to move on to NWA World Championship Wrestling. This will be the February 15th, 1986 edition. We open up with another replay of the Dusty Rhodes Tully Blanchard National Heavyweight title match from the Superstars on the Superstation edition. God, that was a mouthful. And for anyone following along the timeline, I think it's important to reiterate one of the key storylines in the beginning of '86. One of the Horsemen's promos at the beginning of the year was that Tully was going to, quote, eliminate all of Dusty's closest friends so that he had an easy pathway to taking out Dusty for good. Now, as we've established, his plan to take out Dusty's friends consisted of him taking out Magnum TA for approximately 1 week, and also taking out Jimmy Valiant for approximately 1 week. And all that led to the Superstars on the Superstation show, where Tully laid out Dusty with a pile driver, presumably achieving his goal of taking out Dusty. Dusty Rhodes was perfectly fine walking around on this very show. This is one of the lamest storylines in wrestling history. Eliminate all the babyface competition, kinda, so that you can get to the top babyface and take him out, kinda, only for him to end up being none the worse for wear by the following TV show. Tully and JJ really did not think this plan through thoroughly enough. Anyhow, another edition with David Crockett not on the show. Saddening news. I will at least say from the jump that this show was leaps and bounds better than last week. So even with the absence of David Crockett at the booth, there was at least enough good material where I got over my brief depression by the end of the program of not having my weekly dose of David Crockett markout commentary. First match was Jimmy Valiant taking on Ron Rossi. And the best thing about the match, unfortunately, was the very first thing that happened in the match. It begins with Valiant delivering a thumb to Rossi's throat. Because as we've established by now, every Jimmy Valiant match is essentially him doing very bizarre shucking and jiving and heel moves. In addition to him promising that he'll kiss Tony Schiavone later, which he never ends up doing, by the way. Sad to say that everything Jimmy did after the opening thumb to the throat was very boring. Probably because Jimmy Valiant matches are best kept under a minute. This one, I think, went almost 4. And, yeah, that was a bad idea. Then we cut to the booth where Tony was basically mocking and calling out Tully and JJ for the exact thing that I mentioned in the opening of the show, that they promised to kill all of Dusty's friends, yet Jimmy Valiant is out here wrestling a TV match and beating guys. And then JJ made reference to the fact that if Tully had wrestled a guy like Ron Rossi, he would have beaten him in 20 seconds flat. And spoiler alert, Tully wrestled later on the program. He did not win his match in less than 20 seconds. Granted, it was not against Ron Rossi, but still. And then Tully let us know that he would win the National Heavyweight title in 4 weeks. So following that, we had Jimmy Cornette in the Midnight Express out for a promo. One of multiple promo segments for the Midnight on this show tonight. And I think this might have been right around the point where Jim Crockett realized, hey, you know what? Cornette's a pretty entertaining promo. We should get him out here every week to do more material. This was just great. He's out there laughing at all the, quote, female teeny boppers that have been messaging him, all of whom are allegedly Rock and Roll Express fans. So then he opens up a poster of a rather plump woman in a bikini. Am I allowed to say this on YouTube? The whole body positivity movement and fat shaming critics out there. Yeah, fuck it, why not?
He's fat!
And then after that charade, he said that unlike the Rock and Roll, the Midnight Express are going to be defending champions. So they're putting their straps on the line against 2 real men, former tag champion Don Kernodle and the big cowboy Ron Bass. And of course, that was to come later in the program. Cutting to the ring, we get Baron von Raschke versus Kent Glover. We were told during this match that this was the program where later in the show, Paul Jones was going to reveal his new man. And I swear to God, as soon as the name Tijo Khan crossed Tony Schiavone's lips, I immediately screamed, "Fuck!" Because I knew exactly what was coming down the pike. The Paul Jones Army. You know it's coming. I know it's coming. And I am, let's just say I'm not very elated at the concept of the Paul Jones Army, but, yeah, we will get to it. This match sucked. I think I fell asleep watching it. Baron won. That's all I have to say about it. And it was followed with the epic debut of the early stages of the Paul Jones Army. It was not quite in full effect yet. It is Baron von Raschke, the Barbarian, and Tijo Khan. And if y'all don't remember Tijo Khan, first of all, good on you. And second of all, trust me when I tell you, he was about as horrible as you would perceive a Tijo Khan to be. He was a big, beefy, muscular guy with a mohawk, probably around 270, probably 6'3", 6'4". He made big bug eyes at the camera and looked menacing. He shook his head occasionally, and, well, he couldn't wrestle worth a shit. And I can tell you that I spend most of my time just absorbed in the sheer lunacy that was Tijo's facial expressions. I did not write a single thing that Paul Jones or Baron said here. I think they promised that the army was slowly coming together and that soon it would be in full effect. And I know there are a couple more stablemates to be announced by this period. No, they do not get any better. So then we get the Barbarian taking on Paul Garner. Didn't write a whole lot down about this, with the exception of a couple notable spots where the Barbarian looked like he was visibly struggling to pick up and slam Paul Garner. And think about how much body mass you might be carrying when the Barbarian is struggling to pick your ass up and throw you to the ground. There was a spot in this match where Barbarian went to give Garner a power slam off the ropes. I didn't think he was going to clear the flip without spiking Garner on his neck. That is how close Barbarian was to dropping this man. Incredible. So far, this was shaping up to be another fairly awful NWA show on the Superstation. And then Jimmy Valiant hit the booth, and he single-handedly turned the show around. Well, at least temporarily. He begins by yelling at Tully and JJ, which, not entirely sure of what he said there. Something about drinking Kool-Aid and playing dominoes with Tully. I can assure you it sounded better coming from Jimmy Valiant. But then he follows up by running down all of Paul Jones's army in rather comedic fashion, talks about the Barbarian from Parts Unknown, talks about the Baron von Raschke, pronounced exactly like that, from East Germany, you know, as opposed to West Germany, I guess. And best part, Tijo Khan from, where's he from, Tony? Tony quietly goes, I think Singapore. And Jimmy screams out, Singapore! I think just to let us know that Valiant was not paying close attention to Paul Jones's promo either. But doesn't matter where they're from, because according to Valiant, they are all bald-headed geeks. And if there's ever a man on this program that knows how to make Tony Schiavone laugh, it is Jimmy Valiant every time. Tully Blanchard wrestled Ray Traylor, a.k.a. Big Bubba Rogers. God, seeing Bossman in a singlet is a very weird visual. And this was great, though, because, you know, on the surface, you look at a match like this and you think, yeah, it's just Tully doing a random squash against one of the dweebs, nothing really much to write home about. But context is key, and they actually implemented a story of some sort here. Because Tully was a smaller guy, but he was also the more skilled and more experienced worker. So he basically spent most of the match working over the big guy on the mat, trying different chain holds, basically forcing Bubba to work from underneath. And the finish actually saw Tully get the big guy up for the slingshot suplex, which had to have been unexpected on Tully's part, because when he hoisted up that guy and got the suplex, he was overcome with joy. He leapt into the air and screamed at Tony, saying, "That's how you do it." Damn right, Tony. But this was good. And again, keep in mind, folks, especially if you've kept in touch with a lot of Jim Cornette's podcasts and you go listen to his stories around this point, 86 with Bubba Rogers and that whole association, he ended up playing a very integral role in the business not too far from now. You could tell that he was being scouted. A lot of the stars around this point saw big potential in Bubba. And, obviously we knew what would come from him in the latter years, but he was still fresh into the business around this point in 86. And even going in there and doing a quick squash against Tully, they saw something in him. So keep your eyes peeled with Bubba, because Ray Traylor ends up becoming, let's just say, more than generic job guy number 403 on this show. He made more progress in the business than Lee Peak. You can at least say that with a vote of confidence. We had, well, at the time, what was intended to be a promising promo involving the location and venue of the 86 Crockett Cup tournament. Jim Crockett and Tony Schiavone were out there talking about how they would love for the tournament to be held in either Greensboro, Charlotte, or Atlanta. However, there's a bidding war currently going on for where the event should be held, including Tokyo. God, could you have imagined? And, well, let's just say that we were met with some rather heartbreaking news in the coming weeks, as we come to find out that the 1986 Crockett Cup was not held in Greensboro, Charlotte, or Atlanta. We'll not spoil it for the time being, but you can just Google it if you were curious. Also important to know that this was the promo where we began to hear rumblings regarding the Big Gold Belt, my favorite incarnation and design of the World's Heavyweight Championship. And I had totally forgotten that this belt had been introduced in 1986, but Tony informed us that we would be seeing Ric Flair showcase the new championship in the coming weeks. I am salivating at the mouth thinking about it. God, that is a beautiful championship design. Ron Garvin had a match with Art Pritz, which still has to be a toss-up with the worst job guy name on this show with either him or Lee Peak. I still think Lee Peak takes the cake, but God, Art Pritz is a stupid ring name. For the majority of the match, I was starting to think that this was going to be another Ronnie Garvin squash where he takes it easy on the guy he's working with. Then, for no reason that I can conceive of, Ron Garvin just palm slaps Pritz across the face and just kind of randomly got angry. I guess Pritz wasn't feeding for him enough. And after Garvin won with the knockout punch, they proceed to show a slow-mo replay where you can visibly see that Ronnie came nowhere close to making physical contact with Lee before he took the bump. Luckily, Garvin's follow-up promo was 1,000,000 times better than the one from last week. Keep in mind, it is a Ron Garvin promo, so take it with a grain of salt. But, he actually made it through this one without stumbling over himself every 15 seconds or losing his train of thought. So we're making progress in the world. He vows that he's on a collision course to meet with Ric Flair, and when those two trains meet head-on, one is getting run off the tracks. Short and sweet to the point. They were the second Jim Cornette promo on this show, where he and Tony started bickering about the possibility of Crockett Promotions banning Corny from using the tennis racket, which led to the best part of the entire show, where, as Cornette's rambling, he says that it is his Second Amendment right to bear arms, and that they cannot legally take away his racket from him, to which Tony Schiavone comically and inaudibly off the microphone goes, "Bear arms." It was mostly hilarious because, if you know anything about Jim Cornette and his view on politics, like, you think for a fucking second that guy actually believes in the Second Amendment? Much less that he's actually read and understood the Constitution. So that was an inadvertent great heel line. He also let us know that it is his security blanket, so if anyone tries to intervene between him and his precious racket, he might have to involve Mama Cornette into the picture. Mama Cornette, the best peripheral, never televised wrestling persona in the history of the business, probably next to Little Jimmy. Finally on the show, we get a match worth going into detail about. It is the Midnight Express defending the World Tag Team titles against Don Kernodle and Ron Bass. And I'll explain what I loved about this match. The entire premise going in was that Jim and the Midnights wanted to prove that they were the better tag champions than the Rock and Roll Express, that they were defending champs. So, as a way to stick it to them and come across as smug champions, they handpicked two guys that they believed in their minds that they would have an easy time mopping the floor with. Even though one of the guys is a former tag champ and the other guy's considered an upper mid-card guy, at least in this period of 86. So what happens to the egotistical champions? Well, they put their feet in their mouth, and they proceed to go into this match and get their ass kicked for about 80% of it. Bass and Kernodle are just having their way with these guys. Eaton and Condrey can't muster up any offense. Challengers are just beating these poor guys from pillar to post. Cornette's running back and forth between ringside and the booth to let everyone know that his guys are usually slow starters, but they have everything under control. No problem here, nothing to see, blah, blah. Meanwhile, Cornette's sweating bullets, realizing, oh shit, I just cost my guys the belts. Finally, the heels are able to cut off the baby faces for some heat. One of my favorite parts of the whole match was the spot where Kernodle gave Eaton and Condrey the double head clunk spot, and after Bobby took the initial collision, he just kind of walked back over to his corner and completely no-sold it. So, of course, faces end up running wild toward the end. Cornette's practically shitting his pants on the outside, petrified with fear. There's a fantastic spot where the heels try to simultaneously cover Ron Bass for the pin, but he kicks out. So then the heels both try to double stack pin him, and Bass powers both of them out. And ended up breaking down with all four guys at the end. Finish ended up seeing Cornette whack Bass across the spine with the tennis racket for the blatant DQ, which again plays into the whole story of Crockett Promotions trying to ban the racket. So yes, lame fucked finish aside, at least it was done for story purposes. So, well, first we had the Rock and Roll run in to make the save for the faces after the attempted afterbirth. And then we had a promo segment, which was, I can purely describe it as high-class entertainment. Okay, get this segment. Morton and Gibson are staking their claim that they're on their mission to reclaim their tag belts and give Jimmy Cornette his comeuppance, the whole babyface rigmarole. Who should show up but Dusty Rhodes to provide a solution to the whole matter? To which he then walks the Rock and Roll and Tony Schiavone over to a conveniently placed shark cage, probably within 2 or 3 feet of the interview booth. Somehow none of these three guys saw this giant 8-foot shark cage until the very moment it was captured on camera. And his solution was to lock Jimmy Cornette inside the cage, suspend him 80 feet above the ring in order to prevent him from being able to interfere in the Midnight vs. Rock and Roll rematch. And thus began the ensuing drama of my increasingly passionate hatred in pro wrestling for anything regarding shark cage matches. A gimmick match that never made sense to me, and the more it was done over the years, the angrier I got having to watch them. The gimmick match that was designed to prevent interference and bullshit from occurring, yet always turned out resulting in interference and or bullshit occurring. Go figure. Also the gimmick match where instead of doing the logical thing of just banning the fucker from ringside entirely at the threat of, either firing or suspending him without pay. No, the solution was to put them in a cage above the ring while the match was in progress, thinking that the heel was not going to come up with a dastardly plot to cause shenanigans in the match anyway. And yes, I know shark cage matches have been done over the years in the business, even dating back to this period, but I can assure you there was never a shark cage in the history of the business that I watched that I did not think was complete and utter trash. More so based on the fact that it's a completely irrational stipulation match from a booking point of view. So then we come back from the break with Dusty and Baby Doll at the booth. And something about fempowerment, women's rights, yada yada. I kind of tuned this out. Meanwhile, in the segment before, Dusty's making kinky prostitute jokes involving shark cages, so I can't make heads or tails of what the fuck Dusty was talking about here. And right before they left, Dusty made some remark about the brunette from Alabama in the front row that apparently Dusty got the tingles for. Supposedly, Baby Doll was okay with this. To be fair, I guess they weren't technically fucking. Kayfabe. So perhaps she was not offended by Dusty hitting on another chick in front of her face, but this is a weird fucking segment. We had the Rock and Roll Express versus Larry Clark and Bob Owens. I think this was the segment where they put the brunette on screen here, and they actually gave her a graphic. The graphic read, "Pretty lady from Alabama." Didn't even bother giving her a name. No, it wasn't Deb or Catherine or Lily. Nope, just generic brunette 728 that just so happened to be pretty. All I remember about this match was the Rock and Roll one with the double drop kick, and my immediate thought after the match was, why the fuck did I like Rock and Roll Express matches so much as a kid? Seriously, they're the most basic, uneventful, non-memorable matches on the show, yet somehow these guys were one of my favorite teams to watch growing up as a kid, right behind the Midnight Express and the Steiner Brothers. I don't get it. I've already established, too, that Robert Gibson couldn't cut a promo to save his life. I'm starting to think that the Rock and Roll success was purely generated on the success of Ricky Morton, and he was the only one that made the team worthwhile. God, I really should appreciate Ricky more now that I'm in my early 30s. We had a Russians promo with Ivan and Nikita. I think it's a tactical effort on their part every time they have a promo segment with the Russians where they make sure they zoom the camera all the way in on Ivan so that we can clearly see his deflated purple forehead from all the blade jobs. Sickening. All I know is that Ivan spent a lot of the promo running down the Road Warriors and Magnum TA for being liars and cheats. Magnum, by the way, who was standing in the ring getting ready for a match. Why he didn't just run out and start beating down Ivan, I couldn't tell you. And then Ivan informed everyone that until Magnum grew a pair of balls and put his belt up against Nikita on the show, tonight was going to be the last time Nikita would be wrestling. And Nikita said something that may or may have not resembled the English language. I'm not entirely sure. I don't even think a Rosetta Stone could decipher the words that came out of his mouth. God damn it, they booked him in a match this week. They put Lee Peak in there with poor Magnum TA. Thank God Magnum killed him in a minute. And then Magnum cut a promo afterwards, vowing that he'll never let a Russian or commie take the U.S. title back to Russia. A super stern and super serious promo. Arn Anderson versus Sam Houston for the TV title. A match that I probably should not have enjoyed as much as a kid, but goddamn does it go to show just how great Arn Anderson was. And speaking of guys that were dependable defending champions, how great was Arn around this point? He's a TV champion, so by God, every week on this show, he's going to go out there and he's going to put his title on the line, heel or not, doesn't fucking matter. He's going to show that he's a horseman, that he's the top of the food chain, and even people that don't see the TV title as the top belt, well, Arn's going to make sure people know how damn important that belt is. And it was great with how the matches are laid out, too, because they make perfect sense. Obviously, you know that Arn's not losing the belt more often than not in these title defenses. But, they lay the matches out perfectly because he goes in there, he feeds for his opponents, he lets them get in some offense on him, but, it's not so much of a one-sided Flair beatdown where he just sells for 90% of it and finds a way to win in the end. It's mostly a back-and-forth competitive action match. Arn lets his opponent get in some near falls, and Arn usually wins mostly clean in the end. The finish of this was fantastic, too. The whole finish is Sam goes to try and charge Arn near the ropes, but Arn ducks, so Sam tangles himself in the ropes and presumably kills himself on the spot. And I've seen Sam Houston do that before, where he gets mangled in the ropes and just kind of sprawls out in dead man's position on the mat. He makes it look great. And the great thing is Arn just pinned him right after the fact. Didn't need a gore buster, didn't need to hit another move. Nope. Arn just looked down at Sam Houston's mangled body and said, well, this fucker's dead. I'm going to pin him now. And then Arn goes to the booth for an interview, drenched in sweat. And I don't mean like a few droplets on the forehead. He looked like he just walked out of a steam room. I can tell you this for sure. I use a steam room every time I go to the gym. I have sat in a steam room for well over 15 minutes. I've never sweat this much in my entire life. I don't think I could sweat this much if I tried. Granted, I don't have as much body fat as a guy like Arn did, so, it makes it more of an effort for me to get that perspiration going, but God, Arn was totally soaked here. And all he did was put over Sam Houston as a formidable opponent, but just like he's proven to everyone time and time again, just like he'll prove to Dusty, Houston represents everyone that steps up to the plate against Arn. Lots of guts, lots of heart, short on talent. Brutal. We had a rambling Jim Cornette promo with Tony Schiavone at the booth, essentially begging and pleading that he doesn't want to go into the cage. He's afraid of heights, he's claustrophobic, he doesn't belong in cages, he's not an animal, blah, blah. And meanwhile, there's Tony Schiavone just yucking it up the whole time. And after Corny storms off, the only thing Tony can say about the matter is, well, guess you'll think twice next time about using that racket. Like something your middle school principal would say to punish a student after getting detention. Maybe next time you'll think twice about using that tennis racket in class. Now you get to sit at the lunch table on Saturday in detention and think twice about what you've done. Tony is very unsympathetic on this show. Final match was Nikita Koloff versus Josh Stroud. Of course, again, as per direction of the Koloffs from earlier, this will be Nikita's last televised match until Magnum TA gives Nikita a U.S. heavyweight title match. So as the last appearance of Nikita in the ring for the foreseeable future, he is a very forgettable squash against Stroud, wins with the sickle, and as the heels go to beat on Stroud afterwards, outruns Magnum for the save. Of course, he gets the 2-on-1 beatdown, and as the fans are chanting for Dusty, he is nowhere to be seen. And it was not until after the damage was already done to Magnum that Dusty and Ronnie Garvin decided to run out to chase the heels off. Maybe Dusty was taking a leak or something, couldn't make the save in time, who knows. Or maybe he was schlepping the brunette from ringside. And the credits rolled shortly thereafter, thus concluding a passable episode of World Class Championship Wrestling on the Superstation. It was 1,000 times better than last week's show, which I don't think had a single quality match or promo segment worth talking about. At least this week we had a couple fun squashes and a good tag title match, good TV title match, a lot of fun stuff with Jim Cornette. Again, the Paul Jones Army stuff is another story entirely, but we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. But they're pushing some big programs right now. And I think aside from the Magnum Nikita and the Ric Flair Ronnie Garvin stuff, it's safe to say the real big feud of the entire year of 1986 is the Rock and Roll Express and the Midnight Express feud. It's definitely garnering the most intrigue from the fans, and even though I hate the whole shark cage stipulation, the fans want to see it. They want to see Jimmy get locked in that cage and suspended above the ring like a caged monkey. So, hey, worked in the 80s. That's all I can say. All right. Now we are ready to move on to WWF In Your House 6 from the year 1996. And it only took me about 8 years to find it on the Peacock Library. God, their site sucks. You'd think a service I'm paying $10 a month for, they'd at least make their search engine easy to navigate. Now, apparently that's too much to ask for a subscription service in 2022. So anyway, this event did take place on this day, February 18, 26 years ago, live from the Louisville Gardens, and this was the final stop before WrestleMania 12, which I remember being a relatively decent WrestleMania in comparison to previous years. Certainly atop WrestleMania 9 and 11, which I still think might hold the award as ranked among the worst manias of all time. Although, I think WrestleMania 27's up there too. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time revisiting history lessons because I think I covered a good bulk of pretty much where I thought the professional wrestling business stood by this period in early 96 when I talked about that in the Super Brawl 6 recap. Christ almighty, the main event of this show had Diesel in it. No offense to Big Sexy and all, but it wasn't exactly moving the needle in WWF around this point, if you know what I mean. Of course, this was also shortly before the Shawn Michaels Bret Hart title match in Mania, where Shawn won the belt and really excelled to that level as the guy. And I'll get more meticulous with that whole topic once we get to the Shawn match. Our opening match is Razor Ramon versus the 1-2-3 Kid in a crybaby match where the loser will have to be bottled and diapered. Well, this was indeed 1996 in wrestling. I believe the setup going into this match was that Waltman was making fun of Razor for being angry over costing him the Intercontinental title, so, well, obviously logic dictates in 1996 that the only solution to this is to book a stipulation for a match where the loser has to wear a diaper. And you could tell that Hall and Waltman were totally not into this match. But goddammit, they were gonna go out there and try to have something resembling a compelling pro wrestling bout. Keyword, tried. I think Waltman took the best over-the-top rope bump I've ever seen in the business. By and large, I would say the match was adequate. There were parts, especially in the early goings, where Hall and Waltman were totally on different pages with transitions coming off the ropes. But they had a sufficient back-and-forth opening match here. Crowd was surprisingly into this thing, despite the ridiculous step. We did have a brief period about midway through where Waltman had Razor in a sleeper on the mat for what seemingly felt like an eternity. And yes, I know his ring name was 1-2-3 Kid around this point. It's just easier for me to say Waltman than it is to say 1-2-3 Kid. Much like it's easier for me to just say Triple H instead of Hunter Hearst Helmsley. Yet it still took Vince like 3 fucking years to figure that one out. So, Razor ended up making a comeback at the end. Ted DiBiase ended up hitting the ring so Waltman can try to powder Hall in the face, but Hall got the boot up and kicked the powder back. The two Razor's edges to Waltman after pulling his shoulders off the mat the first time was, I don't know, kind of unnecessary in the grand scheme of things, but like I said, match was fine. And God, it is so crazy to think just how weird the wrestling business was around this time. I just think 3 months out from this point, Razor Ramon is showing up on Nitro to kickstart one of the most memorable stories of the late 90s. Meanwhile, in February of the very same year, here are Scott Hall and Sean Waltman, two key stablemates of the NWO. They are wrestling on a WWF house show opener right before their biggest show of the year, and they are doing a baby diaper comedy match. And God bless Sean. Like, he tried to sell the whole embarrassment after the fact with, Hall having diapered him and powdered him and humiliated him in the middle of the ring. But like I said earlier, you could totally tell this dude was not buying any of this bullshit. And, honestly, who could blame him? I never had anything against them doing these kinds of matches in wrestling. I saw Cornette do it in Smoky Mountain with Chris Candido in the mid-90s. I mean, it worked for the time, and it especially worked for the casual crowd. But, yeah, this is one of those gimmick matches that just wouldn't fly in the modern era. Not a chance. So then we cut to the back with Ray Rougeau and Sonny's tits. And aside from the fact that Sonny let everyone know that she wanted to fuck Razor Ramon after the show, the only other thing I wrote down here was the oddly comical parody of Sonny being afraid of Jake Roberts' snake. Yeah, I think you know where I'm going with that one. Look, man, say what you want about Sonny. She's definitely got her demons, as we all do. But she was a natural in the business. From the first time I saw her show up in Smoky Mountain in, 92, 93, whichever year that was. And never mind the fact that she was smoking hot and naturally charismatic, but she picked up on the business in very similar ways to how I'd compare to how quickly the Big Show picked up on the business. She was a natural on camera. She knew how to work her valet manager role effectively. She was a great promo. Sounded very authentic in her delivery. She was very gifted at what she did. And, it's a shame to see just how far she's fallen throughout her life. Because growing up as a kid, I was a big fan of hers. And, God, for all you weirdos out there that are foaming at the mouth and fawning over the chicks in the wrestling business today, all the fucking Botox injected and plastic-looking Barbie dolls they've got on TV, God, I'll take the Sonnies and the Stacy Keeblers and the Tori Wilsons of the world, and you can have your AJ Lees and your Bella Sluts and your Charlotte Flairs if you're into that sort of thing. Second match was Hunter Hearst Helmsley versus Duke the Dumpster Droese. God, I totally forgot about Duke the Dumpster in WWF. Just like one of those names that you completely wipe from memory over the years, and it's probably not a bad thing. And this is right around the period where I think if you took a shot every time Vince McMahon uttered the name Hunter Hearst Helmsley, I think you'd have to get your liver pumped for consuming that much alcohol. I also completely forgot about the bizarre incarnation of Hunter's early character. The whole snobby, pretty playboy gimmick. Like, to think that guy was the same guy that ended up as one of the key mates of D-Generation X. Fucking incredible. And whole setup here kind of stems from the Rumble the previous month, where it wasn't made entirely clear in the video, but I believe Hunter lost a match to Duke, which forced him to enter the Rumble match at number 1. And, well, they had, in the most appropriate yet accurate description I can give it, a house show match. They did some moves, traded back and forth. The fans were kind of into it. But this was still well before peak Triple H and WWF. And Duke the Dumpster was, well, appropriately put, a walking dumpster fire. Perhaps that's where Vince got the ring name from. We had a moment in this match where Vince proposed the big what if question. What if Hunter ended up getting his hair cut from Duke in this match after having had his hair forcibly cut on TV? What would a shaved head Triple H look like? Well, give it 20 years and you got your wish. And again, after some moderately boring wrestling, the finisher is Hunter whacking Duke across the face with a trash can lid, in plain view of the ref, mind you. And then Hunter got the pin. We had a quick merch plug, which consisted of a lot of Diesel gear. No wonder business fucking tanked for WWF around this point. And following that, Michael Hayes conducted a rare interview with the, air quote, first time speaking Yokozuna. Apparently, he forgot that Yokozuna has cut plenty of promos in WWF before. I guess he meant first time speaking on his own. Sure. Oh, and my bad. I said Michael Hayes. I meant to say Doc Hendricks. But the setup here was Cornette turning on Yokozuna in recent weeks after... I still don't exactly remember the whole details of the whole breakup. From the video package, it looked like Corny got miffed that Yokozuna couldn't beat a 10 count after having been dropped out of the ring during a British Bulldog Owen Hart tag match. Obviously, there had been previous dissension before the split, but this was apparently the breaking point for Cornette. He was tired of Yokozuna's big fat ass, so he said, I'm done with this BS.
He's fat!
Getting good use out of that clip this week. And by the time Vader showed up in the next segment, things really did click together here with where they were going for WrestleMania 12. But in his first ever interview, allegedly, Yokozuna actually cut a hell of a good promo. Basically said that he stood in the shadows for 3 years while Corny took all the credit and fame. Says tonight he burns Camp Cornette to the ground. And right before they cut to the ring, Doc informs us that a train wreck is coming. Word. And the final thing I wrote down before they cut to the ring, I think I see why Yokozuna was kept mute for most of his career. Did they really expect anyone to actually buy that guy was Japanese when he spoke here? It's like a Crusher Khrushchev scenario where he's not even trying to fake the accent. And here comes the train wreck. British Bulldog versus Yokozuna. It's funny, I'm going back and watching some of these old Raw shows from the very beginning, like back in 93. And, I mean, obviously when Yokozuna first arrived, he was billed at like 505, I believe. By 1996, they were insinuating that he was pushing about 7 bills. And, I'll say this. He certainly looked bigger in 96 on camera, but I'm yet to figure out whether that was a tactical decision on their part with the way they filmed matches around this period, or if Yoko had really put on that much weight in the span of 3 years. I mean, I know he lived for about maybe another 4 years following this pay-per-view, but good God, 640. That's a lot of man. Probably could have hid me behind one of Yoko's legs and I still would have probably blended in perfectly. The match was pretty much what you would expect a Yokozuna match to be around this point in his career. It was not bad, but it certainly was not like watching a Vader or Bam Bam Bigelow big guy match. Bulldog took some decent bumps to try and get this thing over, but I mean, by and large, it was a very lumbering match and not all that exciting. Finish sucked too with the DQ finish, but it was necessary to kind of get to the story of where they were going for Mania. The afterbirth, I think it lasted longer than the Cold War. Vader ends up making the run-in while Yoko had Cornette trapped in the corner. And after Bulldog jumps in for the double beatdown, they end up cuffing Yoko to the ring ropes. And they beat on him. And they beat on him. And they beat on him. Geeks hit the ring to try and break the fight up. And they kept beating on him. Cornette started whacking officials with a racket. The beatdown ensued. I went to heat my coffee up, and when I came back, we were just cutting to the point where the heels were leaving the ring. Keep in mind, I was gone for probably 2 minutes easily. And I returned just in time to see Goldust and Marlena in the back, where Goldust was molesting a tech guy on a computer. He also let us know that he was oozing in anticipation for his match with Razor Ramon on Raw. Yeah, that all happened. I'm not being frivolous. Look, say what you want about the Goldust character. You know, when you look at him through the scope of 2022 lens, Goldust was light years ahead of his fucking time. Like, wrestling had experimented with the overly androgynous characters throughout history. You take a look at Adrian Street, the Johnny B. Bads, the Ricos, the Billy and Chucks of the world. I mean, gay characters and the flamboyant personas, like, they definitely weren't new to the business by this point. But, you know, even among the names I just listed above, like, they didn't push or toe the lines quite to the extent that Goldust did, even in 1995 and 1996. And, you know, I really thought about this long and hard. Would Goldust work in 2022 to the same degree that it worked in 95 or 96? I don't know. See, the problem is, the reason Goldust worked in its initial incarnation is that it was considered edgy and, you know, towing the lines for the time. You know, but with modern society where social acceptance of the overly flamboyant persona has been pretty much normalized, I don't know. I kind of think Goldust would have just blended in with the Sunny Kisses of the world. People would see it, but it wouldn't be as captivating. Whether or not I think it serves a place in the wrestling business is irrelevant, but I mean, we see the whole feminization of men being pushed so much in the media and culture nowadays. Maybe Goldust in 2022 would kind of just be seen as a normal day-to-day person. He certainly would be a babyface, which when he initially debuted, he was definitely a heel, if I remember right. At least that's what they were pushing with him. So, I mean, yeah, it's a very interesting discussion to have. Like I said, Sunny Kiss is the closest thing wrestling has to a modern day Goldust, and I mean, we all saw how quickly he tanked in AEW. Granted, part of that was also due to the fact that he wasn't a particularly good wrestler. Dustin can at least go in the ring, so while I still think the character would sort of blend in with modern culture, maybe people would get more behind it as long as the wrestler can back it up in the ring. You know, problem is with so many new people in the business today that put characters and personas before ring ability, you know, they start to draw these fallacies that they can get over purely based on their mannerisms or behavior instead of their actual God-given talent. And now that I've been canceled from YouTube for speaking on this controversial topic, let's move on with the show. Owen Hart versus Shawn Michaels, with the added stipulation that Shawn was putting his title shot against Brett on the line in this match. And even though not a single person believed for a split second that Shawn was losing this match, it did kind of provide for a cool what-if scenario. Brett versus Owen in the main event of WrestleMania 12 for the WWF title. What if? It also hit me during HBK's interview with Tom Pettingale. I totally forgot that the single male ear piercing was actually in style at one point. It's so tacky. You know, watching this match back, I continued to ponder the question. I wonder what it truly was about Shawn Michaels that Jim Cornette absolutely despised and loathed. Because it took me a long time to really figure out what exactly it was. I think I get where he's coming from now. This was... Okay, I'll be fair. It was not peak, no fucks given Shawn Michaels, but it certainly was not 1992 or 1993 Intercontinental Champion Shawn Michaels. That is for damn sure. And I'm not going to do a deep dive into the rabbit hole of Shawn's career. I think that would necessitate an entire podcast discussion, and I just don't have the time for it here. But I will say personally, growing up at a relatively young age and watching WWF around this point, Shawn Michaels never hit home with me in the way that he may have hit home for a lot of young fans at the time. I think I always knew that he was athletically gifted and super talented in the ring, but there was always something about 1990 Shawn that never clicked with me. Albeit 20-odd something years to reflect on what exactly that thing was that never clicked. I'm still trying to figure it out. Maybe I was mature enough at a young age to kind of see through the smoke and mirrors and realize that Shawn was really super invested into his own ego. I don't know how an 8 or 9-year-old would be able to perceive that, but maybe that's what it was. Maybe it's that he was the complete polar opposite of Bret Hart in every conceivable way imaginable. And I always kind of enjoyed watching Bret more than Shawn on screen. And I still have been on record saying that I was never a big Bret Hart fan either. I always preferred Owen over Bret. Again, I have to keep hammering this point home that I was not a conventional wrestling fan growing up. My favorite wrestler of all time is The Undertaker, for God's sake. And this was well into the point in his career where he was doing all the demonic, supernatural, hokey shit that totally wouldn't work in the modern era. Truthfully, I don't think I came around to Shawn until I saw him come back from back surgery. Guess that would have been early 2000s, right? 2001, 2002? No, it had to have been 2002, because 2001 was the invasion. And I know Shawn wasn't part of that. It might have been the following year. But regardless of how you want to phrase it, he found God, he ditched the drugs and alcohol, he reevaluated his life and self-perception, he matured in order to get a fresh start in the business. Whatever the case was, I came to really like Shawn's work after he came back from surgery. I just saw a totally different Shawn, for lack of better terms. He really felt and came across like a completely new person. I still remember the visual of him holding up that world title in the poop brown pants and just thinking, that's the face of a man who's truly remorseful for his past transgressions. And, I really think the older I get, the more I believe in the concept that people can change and turn their lives around for the better. I know it's easy to get stuck on the concept that people can never truly change and it's all a bunch of hocus pocus BS to pull the wool over people's eyes, and I get it, but because I watched Shawn very closely from the early 2000s right up until his final match with Taker at Mania. That Shawn Michaels was not the same mid to late 90s prick Shawn Michaels. So, again, it took me a long time to really conceptualize where Jim and I sort of differ on the whole Shawn Michaels thing. I think we're both well in agreement that we hated pre-surgery WWF champion Clique member Shawn Michaels. I just think we may see differently on the post-surgery road to redemption Shawn. Now, all that said, regardless of how I may have felt about Shawn around this time, I won't deny this guy was fucking over like wildfire. When he came out dancing and shaking his ass on the roof of the stage set, he comes blazing down the ring to throw Owen over the top rope to the outside before he takes off his gear and while his music is still playing. Dude, it was everything you needed to know about Shawn Michaels at this point. And again, discounting personal opinions, I think you're kidding yourself if you try to stake the claim that this wasn't the best match of the entire show. Granted, yes, the bar was already set pretty low going in, but this is still a hell of a pay-per-view match. This would have probably been a great stable for pay-per-view match, much less a house show or a secondary pay-per-view event. They worked a very old school, modern WWF style match for the time. Owen was a great heel. Cornette was a great heat magnet on the outside. Shawn was the second incarnation of Jesus Christ to these people. Some great spots in this match. I don't see too many guys do this in the business anymore, but the spot where you have the guy on the apron and the other guy's trying to give him the vertical suplex into the ring, but then the guy on the apron reverses it and dumps him to the outside with the suplex. I mean, I cringe every time I see it, but as long as you know that the guy taking the bump to the outside isn't going to shatter his ankles on the landing, it's a great looking visual. The enziguri that Owen gave to Shawn was a fucking thing of beauty, and a very simplistic finish that worked perfectly here. Shawn goes for the sweet chin music. Owen ducks it to try for another enziguri, but Shawn scouts it this time. Gets a super kick. 1, 2, 3. Clean pin. And, I'll say this. Shawn did some real vulgar political shit around this point. Especially when it came to trying to protect his top spot. I mean, I distinctly remember the exact same year, about 6 months down the road from now, SummerSlam 96, Vader versus Shawn for the WWF title, and that whole drama. A real missed opportunity for WWF to capitalize on something potentially hot with the new arrival of Vader, and maybe actually go full force with cultivating a monster heel that wasn't Kevin fucking Nash. Of course, we remember how that all went down. With that said, he didn't bury Owen here. He gave this guy everything, and he did his damnedest to feed for him. Granted, probably could have done without the whole opening montage of Shawn dumping Owen to the outside before the opening bell so he could do his showboating and dancing, but pick and choose your battles, I guess. But like I said, best match on the show easily, and even though nobody batted an eyelash at the idea that Shawn was losing here, it did create a very interesting possibility for an Owen-Brett title match at Mania. Especially when you factor in their previous Mania bout at WrestleMania 10 just 2 years prior, there was relative history there. So even if by some happenstance Owen got the fluke pin, the title match for Mania would have made sense to do. So we did have the cage match, but I did want to briefly touch on the whole Roddy Piper promo with Cornette because, well, no doubt, it was a Roddy Piper skit. And again, this is fucking over 20 years ago, so I'm fuzzy on a lot of the intricate details, but I think the story here was that Roddy was acting as interim president or manager for the WWF. Why, how this came to be, I honestly couldn't recall if you held a gun to my head. I do remember that it led to the big Mania match with him and Goldust, but as far as the whole nooks and crannies of what led them to this point with him as acting commissioner or GM, I'm still kind of in the dark with that one. But anyway, he's out there rambling as only Roddy knows how to do. Something about Michael Jackson being guilty and how he ain't afraid of no boogers. I presume he meant Bastion Booger. But he ends up jumping to the topic of Yokozuna and Vader. He says that what he saw earlier won't stand. So as acting commissioner, he's booking Vader versus Yokozuna for Mania. A match that never happened. And, I should say, at least in singles competition, the match didn't happen. I believe it ended up being some kind of multi-man stip match where if Yokozuna won for his team, he would get 5 minutes in the ring with Cornette or something like that. So, I mean, technically we got Vader and Yoko, just not one-on-one, which, again, given Yoko's health around this point, this was probably for the better. All I remember here is that Jim Cornette came out with Clarence Mason to rant and rave to Piper, which was quality entertainment in and of itself. And then Roddy claimed that Yokozuna was 640 pounds, which meant 320 on each cheek. apparently not accounting for any other part of Yokozuna's ginormous body. Apparently it's only the ass that matters. And that was pretty much it. A segment that ended up serving a purpose in the end, but not directly leading to what was initially prompted here. One might call that false advertising in the business. In the main event for the WWF Championship, in a cage, Diesel versus Bret Hart. I like how even Jerry Lawler had to let us know that he wasn't the biggest fan of Diesel, but anyone that beats up Bret Hart and takes away the title from him is considered a hero in his playbook. Yes, even Jerry Lawler was not a fan of Kevin Nash around this point. Just to let you know, even the heel commentator can't stand one of WWF's top heels in '96. And going back in the time machine and watching Big Daddy Cool matches, I now know why business sucked around this point when he was at the top as the champion. God, his matches were the shits. Think about how much ground that covers too, when even Bret Hart can't carry your ass to a watchable title match. Granted, the cage didn't do them any favors. The entire match was both guys trying to escape through the door, but one guy would grab the other guy's foot and vice versa. Bret, of course, is fucking killing himself with bumps in there trying to get this thing over. And I really didn't write a whole lot down about it, if I'm being honest. It did have one of the dumbest pet peeves of mine when it comes to cage matches in wrestling. The spot where the guy has already climbed over the cage, and somehow the guy is able to pull him back into the ring, over the top of the cage back into the ring, which basically implies that the guy has to cooperatively climb back over the cage to get back into the ring in order to make the spot work. I know that probably didn't make any sense on the surface, but go back and watch the match. Fast forward to the point where Nash ends up pulling Bret back over the cage to get him in the ring. You'll understand what I'm talking about. And again, nitpicky shit that I've seen done in the business for years and just makes me roll my eyes. Of course, the ending was the most memorable part. The Undertaker shows up from under the ring, pulls Diesel underneath the ring so Bret can climb out the door and retain. Even though the rationalist in me sits here in 2022 and says, well, technically Diesel touched the floor first, so shouldn't he have won the championship? Apparently they didn't think that major gaffe through at the time. And obviously we know with that setup between Diesel and Taker for Mania. It's kind of weird how quickly Bret just disappeared from the equation too. Climbs out of the cage, grabs the belt, and he's completely out of the picture for the rest of the show, while the lasting image is Taker doing the big stare down with Nash from the aisleway. And that was the close of the show. A very interesting show to go back and watch. Like I said, Mania 12, from my recollection, ended up being a relatively solid Mania for that year, despite all the bad booking and the negative aura surrounding the business around this particular point. And again, this is all pretty much hard-selling Mania and trying to piece together the last remaining parts of the card before the big showdown, but yeah, they did a real solid job building up the show. The opening match here was good, despite the lame gimmick. Hunter and Duke was bad, but it was short. Yokozuna and Bulldog was more of an extended angle to get the big Vader debut and to set up the whole Team Cornette thing for Mania. The Sean Owen match was very good, despite my personal grudges and feelings for HBK around this point. And the main event was boring, mostly due to Nash's faults. But I'll at least credit Bret for going out there and trying to make chicken salad out of chicken you-know-what. But these in-your-house shows were always really fun to watch as a kid. I know they tried revamping this feel with NXT over the last couple years with the TakeOver specials, but man, nothing beats the original feel of those old in-your-house shows, and they were a lot of fun. And they weren't too long either, which probably made it worth the watch. If you're looking to go back in the archives and scope out a couple of the old shows, I probably recommend you skip this one. Maybe just check out the Sean Owen match if you're perusing for some good wrestling. But yeah, take out the Mania plot development. They're really weren't any standout matches here worth going out to check out, aside from that one match. With that said, that'll do it for another lengthy Friday podcast here. Got a hell of an editing job to do here before this show goes up. Next week we will be back for the normal format of NWA WCW and World Class Championship Wrestling reviews. Again, the Super Brawl and the In Your House were treated as sub-outs for the fact that the last 2 weeks of World Class episodes are not currently archived on Peacock. So I just wanted to replace it with something that still kind of follows the retro format. If it turns out we get more shows that aren't archived with WCW or World Class, which I'm sure there will be a few upcoming episodes, I will probably take the same approach and, find something else to replace it with for that segment. It may not be a pay-per-view, it may just be a regular show, maybe a match, but we'll leave that one in the air for now. Until Monday, we'll be back for the Rampage Report. Hopefully NWA's Power Trip show will be up by that point. And I would also like to review Impact Wrestling's pay-per-view this upcoming weekend. I think it's No Surrender. So that'll at least give the Monday show a little bit of length after the shorter podcast in the past 2 weeks. Gotta get a little bit of variety in there with the content too. So we got AEW, NWA, and Impact. So until then, take care all. Peace out.